I'm a god.
Well, what if there is no tomorrow?
I'm a god.
There wasn't one today.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of It's Time to Rewind, a podcast stuck in its own time loop right along with the movies we discuss. And this season, we're taking a look at Groundhog Day, after day, after day, after day, after day. I'm your host, Bubbawheat from Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights, and in this episode, we're discussing Phil's first February 2nd, Groundhog Day, that starts at 7 minutes and 26 seconds with the opening shot of the Cherry Street Inn and the alarm going off to Sonny and Cher's I Got You, Babe, and ends at 18 minutes and 17 seconds with Miss Lancaster telling Phil sweet dreams after telling him that of course there wouldn't be any hot water today. Here with me is Paul Hawkins from the BlokeBusters Podcast, and he's also done a guest column on my own site at Flights, Tights, and Movie Nights. How are you doing today, Paul?
I am doing fairly well. Thank you very much for that lovely intro, and I swear that that particular column will be coming back soon. I know it has been a little while, and many things have been going on, unfortunately, in my life that has put that on the back burner. But
That's
yes,
all right. I'm right there with you. I've only just started writing for my site again here in the past couple months now.
Yeah, obviously it's been interesting times that we're living in, but
to put it mildly.
Yes, but aside from that, like my work and other things that have been going on have unfortunately taken precedent for that. I say unfortunately, because it makes it seem like earning a living is an unfortunate thing to do. But yes, no, I'll be back for that. However, why don't we dive in here? I'm very interested to hear your take on this whole thing. When you actually told me and everyone else about it when you were in the planning stages here, I thought this was really interesting. I have seen the odd podcast here and there where they go minute by minute and they'll do something like that, but I've not seen anything quite like this, so I'm intrigued to see where it goes.
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting to do it this way because minute by minute, that's a very standard chunk of time, and even if you go like chapter by chapter or 5 minutes by 5 minutes, it's a fairly standard piece of the movie that you're talking about in each episode. But with this method, the loops are as short as like less than 1 second or as long as almost 13 minutes in Groundhog Day and some other movies that might be longer. But I would like to know, what is your experience with time loop movies in general?
Thinking back on it, I think the first time I saw any film that had this kind of idea behind it, it was probably Source Code. It's technically a time loop film, however, it's not necessarily someone is completely stuck within that loop for the entire time.
Yeah, I haven't seen it myself, but it's, from what I understand, it's kind of like a cross between a time loop and like a more Rashomon style of storytelling.
Kinda, yeah. For people that haven't seen it, very quickly, the entire premise is that there is one character, played by Jake Gyllenhaal, who is forced to go back through the same bit of time over and over to find out how a train ended up. I think it blew up. I don't think it was a derailing. I think this train specifically blew up in the film. It had been a little while since I've seen it. But he is sent back through the use of pretty much literal Deus Ex Machina machine. And so he keeps getting sent back through that. But we do see outside of that, we see him in the quote-unquote present day before he gets sent back. So it's not fully self-contained loop. And then I was thinking back on it and thinking several of the films that I've seen, I've actually covered on the BlokeBusters podcast. We did Looper. We also did Live, Die, Repeat, which is better known now as Edge of Tomorrow. However, I went and saw it in the cinema when it was still See, I can't remember which one it was. Whichever one it was originally, that's what I saw. And then literally when I was sitting down to record it with Brian, that was when they had announced they were changing it. Since then, also seen Looper, which phenomenal film. I'm not even going to go into spoilers for that. If you want spoilers, you can get the podcast. But that film, fantastic. I recommend people go see it. The Girl Who Leapt Through Time. I've seen the anime of that. I haven't seen the live action ones that they've done. But
yeah,
that one...
One thing that I found out in my research is the first time loop movie that I could find was actually the live action version of The Girl Who Leapt Through Time, which came out in 1983, I believe.
Yeah, they did that one in 83. They did another one in the late 90s, which I don't think was super popular or did that well. They did the anime, and then the person who actually plays the main character in the anime plays the main character in the live action one that came after that, which is a direct sequel to the original live action. So it's very interesting. I need to go and check those out because I've heard good things about them.
Yeah, I'm really excited to start getting through more of these because my own time loop experience has mostly been limited to a lot of TV shows and then and Edge of Tomorrow and maybe like one other movie that I can't think of off the top of my head.
I can tell you two more that I've seen from the film side. There's a film called Repeaters, which, as far as I know, is a fairly unknown indie film at this point in time. I think it was like, I managed to catch it. Myself and my wife watched it. It was on a streaming service. I can't even remember which one. Probably Hulu, actually, thinking about it. But it was a relatively low-budget film that came out, and it's about 3 drug addicts at a rehab place that realize that they're stuck in the same day over and over, and what they do as a result of that, and it's actually really well done. I recommend people go and check that out. I think it's from 2011 or something like that. Like it's an older film, but it's really good. And then the other one that I had totally forgotten about is actually very reminiscent of Groundhog Day. It's Naked with Damon Wayans.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing the poster for that.
Yeah, so Marlon Wayans, I believe it is, not Damon. And it actually isn't bad. Like, you know, it's not something that I thought was fantastic. It's not something that I apparently thought was worth really remembering. But I do remember not hating it. So I guess it's got that going for it. But yeah,
at least that's something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Today we're talking about the first loop, if you can even call it the loop, because technically the loop hasn't started yet, but this is the first instance of the February 2nd in Groundhog Day.
Yes, the unknown beginning, which is always interesting.
And of course in the structure of the time loop, I think this is one of the most important parts of the film, because this sets up basically all the touchstones that we're going to see repeated in later days. By my count, I'd say that there's 7 notable milestones in Groundhog Day that's set up here in the first loop.
Okay, interesting. So I'm gonna hazard a guess as to the first one, which has got to be the "I Got You, Babe" beginning with the radio.
Right.
And interesting because, and when I was watching this bit, and as I was actually watching this bit, I was trying to think of it as like, forget the rest of the film, just focusing on the loop, but then also kind of thinking about how this is the beginning of this whole loop thing, and specifically the fact that you're going to be talking about this for a long time. And I was just thinking, like, yeah, you better be looking forward to listening to this song a lot. I do find it interesting actually, just as on a personal note for that beginning, can I just say that I absolutely hate talk radio? I cannot stand that. Like, and obviously you get people that have actual chemistry, and you get people that are good at doing it, but it just always feels forced to me. Like, you are literally shoving at least one or two people into a room together and just saying, like, be funny for the next 2-3 hours.
Yeah, one thing that I think that I find quite interesting, because I'm the same way. I hate the forced morning radio, but the morning radio shows that I have enjoyed, I feel like, and I'd say that this is a change that's happened in the past 10 years or so, but I feel like the morning radio shows that I gravitate towards feel more like podcasts than they do morning radio.
Right. Yeah. I will say the only radio that I've quote unquote listened to probably in the past almost decade at this point have been through podcasts. So I've listened to Wait, Don't Tell Me, the podcast of that. I listened to Serial and things like that. So, obviously things that have come out of NPR. But I hate all the ads. I hate the forced things. Like, I'd rather just listen to a podcast or have a CD on or something like that than have to listen to both shoved together and have no control over it.
Yeah, even though nowadays podcasts do tend to have ads, at least the more popular ones do. Unless you're just listening to the ones like this one that are just completely independent and are doing it as a hobby and not really making any money off of it. One thing I think is interesting with the radio guys is that they're doing this, the morning zoo style radio where they're doing the bad jokes, and it sounds extremely forced, and it's very obvious that Phil is annoyed, even though he's not annoyed enough to go turn off the radio. He's still just doing his morning routine, but there's like kind of his body language definitely tells that he's not enjoying this broadcast, except it's interesting that it's pretty much the exact same kind of thing that he was doing in his own weather forecast.
Yeah, it is odd because it seems like, and this is actually something that I was kind of shocked when I was watching, again, I just watched this loop by itself, but thinking back on it, like Bill Murray at this time, he was the comic relief. He was the standout funny man. He was the one with all the jokes. And then this film came along, and he is an incredibly annoyed, grumpy individual, at least for the first, let's say, 30-40% of the film. So, like, he gets to just be this miser of a person. And it actually is really nice to see how much he hates it. And you can kind of tell when it comes to his job, he's proud of the fact that he's a celebrity, but he clearly doesn't really care for the job.
You reminded me that his character does feel very reminiscent of his character in Scrooged.
Yeah.
Which was just a few years earlier in 88.
Yeah, it's kind of like almost the next step up because, in Scrooge, he is just this, again, he is a miser, but it almost cartoonishly so. Mm. Whereas in this one, he genuinely is just portraying just this beaten down, grumpy guy who he doesn't even really have a reason to be as grumpy as he is. Like, Scrooge in Scrooge is a miser just because he spent a lifetime amassing wealth and pushing everyone away. Whereas in this one, it's just like, he's just a jerk, really. He's just a mean guy that, if he had any ounce of, like, just being able to just look look at his life for a minute, he could go, "Oh wow, I actually don't have it that bad." But no, he's just so stuck with it himself that. And again, at the very beginning of this, like before he gets into his loop, he is going through the motions. He doesn't care. Does not care at all about the fact that he's here and could not get away any faster. Obviously, he doesn't, but but that's clearly his headspace at the beginning of this.
Yeah, one other quick thing I wanted to mention that you reminded me of is, the fact that during Phil Connor's broadcast, he calls it this big blue thing. And then the radio guys also repeat that exact same thing whenever they called it this blizzard thing.
Yeah,
I think that's an interesting connection between those two people and just the fact that Phil is completely annoyed by them. It's it's like he's annoyed with himself, and I think that comes into play later in the movie.
Yeah, it is. It is actually something that I've never really sat down to think about, and maybe by the end of this season that you're doing, you'll have like a really good idea on what the answer might be, and maybe this is something just for me to posit right now, and you'll have a response at the end of it all. But what do you think is the actual reason that he gets stuck in this loop? Because, just in terms of happy film at the end and all of that, like, clearly the overall thing at the end is, oh, he got the girl and blah, blah, blah. What is it that started it? Like, what do you think is the actual impetus for it? So, and I as I say, I don't expect you to have an answer now, but I'll be intrigued to see what your answer might be at the end of all of this.
Yeah, it's tough to say what outside force caused it. You could almost say that it was an internal force because, Phil Connors is stuck in his own time loop, like everybody is, just living the same day over and over and not really happy with his life, not happy with himself. And then at the end of the movie, he does have a more positive outlook, and he's more positive about himself and his surroundings. And we go through that change, not just with the relationship aspect. Even though in an earlier version of the script, it was supposed to be an ex-girlfriend that like cast a curse on him. And that was originally going to be the impetus for the loop, but then they got rid of that.
Yeah, I think I remember reading about that, like, years ago. And I was when I was watching this, because I watched it a few times just to really get a good idea for this beginning of the loop. And I was trying to see anything, literally anything on the screen that was remotely either left over from that or anything that they might have put in as you see this little thing here, there's a symbol somewhere or something that's kind of does it, but I could not spot anything.
There is one other thing that I did notice that actually ties into the second milestone, what I would call the second milestone, that the guy that comes up the stairs and asks if he's on his way to see the groundhog, and he asks if Phil thinks, like, he asks him when he thinks spring will start, and Phil says March 21st, and then the guy's like, oh, isn't that the actual first day of spring? But it's actually not the first day of spring, not anymore. It used to be the first day of spring, but because of the slight changes in the Earth's orbit, it's now, and even in the 90s, spring starts on March 20th. So he's missing a day there, and that could be why has to repeat the day, because he's a weatherman and he got that wrong by a day.
So, somehow cursed.
It's the weather gods, How dare you be a weatherman and not know when spring starts?
I mean, to be fair, if you're talking about, say, the old Greek god pantheon, that is absolutely something they would have done. So, yeah, I mean, you never know. Depending on which mythology you end up rooting for, yeah, that could 100% be it. That tiny slight was all that was needed.
And then the only other thing that I think is I personally think is interesting about the guy that comes up, and I believe his nickname is Pork Chop for him. But I always remember that actor, at least I didn't double check, but I'm pretty sure he was in the sitcom Herman's Head. He played one of the 4 voices inside of Herman's Head, and he was Lust.
Interesting. Okay.
Which, for people that don't know Herman's Head, it's basically Inside Out, except a sitcom in the early 90s with 2 of the Simpsons voice actors playing live action characters.
Yeah, I believe you are 100% correct. That is him indeed. So, yeah, I'm going to have to search that out. I'd never heard of that before, but that definitely sounds like something up my alley. What did you think of, and again, it's pretty much just tying into setting up just how annoyed Phil Connors is at having to interact with everyone. Like, when he's asking for the cappuccino or the mochaccino,
The espresso.
The espresso, that was it.
Yeah, and that's I would say that is the third milestone, is the lobby of the bed and breakfast, and his interaction with Miss Lancaster, the B&B owner.
Yeah, and that whole thing where, like, and I'll be perfectly frank, it's fantastic writing, but the bit when he is just going through the whole weather pattern and then just saying, like, you know, oh, like, you know, did you want to talk about the weather, or are you just making small talk? Like, it's like such.
And she's just kind of like, oh, just chit chat.
Yeah, such a dick move. However, a fantastic setup for that character, and I appreciated it. So,
yeah, I think it really emphasizes how he feels like he's better than everybody in this town, and they're all just, he thinks of them all as hicks, as he says later in the day, where, you know, he thinks that she doesn't even know how to spell espresso just because she lives in this smaller town.
Hey, I'll be perfectly frank, I'm not sure I could spell espresso, because I know that it's either got an X or an S in it, and I'm never sure which one it is, because I don't care. I enjoyed that bit. However, I believe the next milestone has got to be probably one of the most quoted bits in the entire film by fans of the film, and that has to be the introduction of the legendary Ned Ryerson.
Yeah, well, I do think that there is one, it's a more minor milestone, but it does come up a few other times later in the movie, and that's the homeless man. You know, he just gets a few seconds, but, you know, they're notable seconds, and he gets his time in the sun later on.
Yeah, ideally the more again dick move than just flat out just being like no is the, oh, do I have that, no I don't, and then just giving up. Like, yeah, no, that's yeah, that is an interesting intro, and from what I recall, yeah, definitely something that was put in to set something up for later, but it is so just sort of average day-to-day interaction that you don't really register it. So very well set up. It's Chekhov's hobo. But then, yes, of course, Needle Nose Ned the Head, Ned Ryerson.
Yes, and the actor is Stephen Tobolowsky, and he's one of those character actors that you've probably seen him in a dozen movies and didn't realize that you've seen him in a dozen movies.
Yeah, he just, he's fantastic. I mean, actually, to touch on something that we were talking about in the preamble before we started recording, he's also in Memento.
Yes.
He
plays Sammy Jenkins.
Yeah, just and so many great things. He was also in Heroes, which I enjoyed, despite the fact that it definitely did just kind of dive off a cliff towards the end.
Had a great first season, and some more episodes after that.
It did indeed. Yes. I didn't mind the end though. I'll give it that. I did not mind the ending of Heroes, but it took a while to get there. One
thing that I realized with Ned Ryerson is right now I'm actually within just a couple years of the age that Bill Murray was when he filmed Groundhog Day. And just a few years ago, I actually went to my own 20th high school reunion. And, the people that I saw there, outside of, the circle of friends that I spent a lot of time with in school, I had zero memory of practically anybody else that was there. And I could totally see a Ned Ryerson type coming up to me and trying to remind me of them, and me just sitting there just like Phil and just be like, nope, doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, and it is interesting because as you watch Ned going on about everything, and even getting to the point where it's like, I even went out with your sister a couple of times till you told me not to, and you can tell even that there's no recognition whatsoever. So he just pulls and I know how this works because I will flat out say I've done this myself, where you basically just kind of repeat something that they've said, and they take it as, now you remember. It's like, no, I don't, but we're gonna run with this. And something that I absolutely love in this scene, it is probably, for me, one of my favorite lines in the entire film. And just, it's partly because of the good writing, and it's almost all because of Bill Murray's actual delivery of the line. But it's when he says, I would love to stand here and talk with you, but I'm not going to. It's just a wonderful line. And so
then
well done.
And then followed up with the, how would you like to go out for dinner later? He's like, no, I've got to do something else.
Yeah. What was it? It's, What are you doing for dinner? Something else. It's just absolutely non-committal.
Absolutely does not even care enough to come up with an excuse.
Yeah, and it's also fairly interesting as well. I don't know how much you were paying attention to it, and I really tried to stick with it during my second watch through of this one. But after Ned gets the bing that he's looking for, and that he you remember me, the entire dialogue up until the point where he says it's so good to see you is just Ned talking about life insurance stuff. It's not talking about what he's been doing since then. It's not him trying to connect with Phil. It is just life insurance. And then he ends up just going, oh, it's so good to see you again. It's like, there's such a weird disconnect with Ned that it's almost... this is going to be my sort of fan theory for this. I think Ned Ryerson could effectively be almost a low-key figure in this. I don't think there was a Ned Ryerson that Phil went to school with. I think he's the one that's in charge of this and is just messing with him.
He's pulling the same trick on Phil that Phil pulls on Nancy a couple days later.
Yeah. And it's so... It's so weird because like there genuinely is nothing other than everything that Ned just kind of throws out at the beginning. There's nothing in this that actually gives you any inkling that Ned actually does or did know Phil and did go to school. It's just like he's just trying to get him to remember it, and Phil doesn't remember at all. So like,
I almost think that Ned Ryerson is actually not like Ned the Bull. I think he's actually, a failing insurance salesman, because, he hands him his card, and he hands him his card from like inside his glove. And that's not where most people would keep their business cards. They would keep them someplace nice and neat. And instead he hands him this kind of almost slightly crinkled up business card that's just been right inside of his glove for who knows how long. And he just goes straight into his insurance pitch. And it is like after he tries to, as soon as Phil shows some sign of false recognition, he just goes into his insurance pitch out of a playbook. He's just, 100%. It's like, oh, there's somebody that I knew from high school. That's my in. I've got to get at least one more insurance, or I'm not going to be able to pay the rent this week.
Yeah, I'm sticking with my theory that Ned Ryerson is actually Loki. Just messing with him.
And then the last thing that I wanted to say about Ned Ryerson is my favorite bit of the line is just whenever he starts going, right, and then he like devolves into like rah, 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 rah. Yeah. Just the way, just how that sounds. It just really tickles me every time I listen to it. That was a part of of this loop that I was drawn to the most this time around.
And the one thing that really got me as well is obviously as he's leaving and he steps into that puddle, and it's that line of what's the first step? It's a doozy. And then I was just thinking about it. It was like you see how far in his foot goes, right? Like that's
it's like
genuinely
halfway up to his chin.
Yeah, it's genuinely a serious health hazard. Like someone's going to get sent to hospital just based on that. So yeah, it's that was an interesting thing. I was like, obviously it's played off as a joke because he steps into this comically large puzzle and gets his wet feet. But just thinking from an actual even a city planning standpoint, something like that, it's like I want to know how that sinkhole basically appeared in the first place, because that's and again I think that's more the Ned Ryerson trickster acting up. I think he's just like, big hole, there you go. My next note on from that, actually, unless you had anything you wanted to say about the that first step, is
other than they're I mentioned it in the last episode, but they're in the actual Woodstock, Illinois, where this was filmed. There is a plaque right there that Bill Murray stepped here.
I like that. That's cool. The sort of establishing shot of the what
Gobbler's
was that?
Knob.
The plaza, the city square.
Gobbler's Knob.
Yeah. When he's walking through and you can see everyone on a gazebo, did you notice the mother and father bear? I guess that was in that gazebo. Did you spot that?
No, I didn't notice that.
Because it's quite literally, it's two people in bear costumes, and one of them has imagine an olive oil dress, but it's just all pink, like a nightie. That's what one of them has on, and they're just in this gazebo, waving and stuff to the crowd. It's like, why would you go to this dressed up as a bear unless you're planning on rushing the stage and eating the groundhog?
Well, clearly it's because you can't get a groundhog costume, so that's the next best thing is a bear costume and say it's a groundhog.
Yeah, I get. Maybe that was it. Maybe they genuinely just could not find a groundhog costume, and they were like, "Well, no one's going to be able to pause this and look at it in any detail," because back in 1993, that wasn't really a thing. Like, you could, as Eddie Izzard would say, if you had the VHS at home, you could La Cucaracha it, where it would just be everyone would sort of be paused but dancing, because you never got a completely still image on that. That was interesting. I didn't even consider that.
Because in this movie, like the Groundhog's Day festival is presented as this big thing, and it was definitely a thing, but it was not a big thing. It was just like a small local festival. Like, I wouldn't be surprised even if, the crowds shown in this movie are larger than what the actual crowds would have been back then. And then, of course, after the movie came out, then that's, increased its popularity like tenfold.
Yeah, I was actually going to say that this film is literally, or was literally, my introduction to the concept of Groundhog Day. And I genuinely didn't know it was a real thing for years after I saw this film. Because I just thought, who would be stupid enough to have this thing where apparently a groundhog sees its own shadow if it's going to be a longer winter, when obviously that's complete and utter, like, just made up stupid. It's like I could not wrap my brain around this. And then when I found out it was actually a thing that people actually do, and like there's this whole thing around it, I was like, okay, if you want, sure. Like, I couldn't believe it. But I will say that for all of me picking on and pointing out just how grumpy Phil is in this and how much he clearly hates people, I am kind of on his side at being annoyed at how cheerful Rita is in this particular loop, because if I had to work with someone who was that just constant cheerfulness and always smiling and always like, I think I by default resort to the grumpy side, because I am not shocker to anyone listening, I'm sure I'm not that personality type. I don't have that that bubbly, always cheerful disposition. So when I have to work around people that are like that, it's it can be interesting. so yeah, but I don't know if you paid much attention to this bit as well. When he's doing his broadcast, like, he's clearly not the only news station there. There are cameras from like around other places, and you can see in some of the shots, you can see them in the background and stuff like that. But he is definitely the loudest person talking at this. So, like, and of course, from the way the film is, I'm sure they dropped the crowd noise down, or they just told the people on the day to be quieter so that you could very clearly hear Bill Murray as Phil. But he is the loudest thing in the square every time he talks. It was interesting to watch that, and I was just thinking, wow, pretty much every other news station is just getting free Phil Connors in their footage.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting that the introduction to the groundhog that Phil does is actually good. It's well done. It's, he's bright. It's cheery. It fits. Like, he even gets like the 2 okays from Rita afterwards. And it's not until after the groundhog sees his shadow and they declare 6 more weeks of winter, that clearly has an effect on Phil, and the hearing that there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter immediately depresses him. He goes back into sarcastic, sour Phil mode and talks about the squirrel, the oversized squirrel.
Yeah. Although it is interesting as well, because when they're getting the groundhog out, and then you can hear him talking about, they get a little rat out and all this stuff, and it's like, well, he's not doing it for the footage, because he's like, we don't see him holding the thing, and that wouldn't be something that they would put on on the channel. So he's clearly not doing it for that. He's just doing it for the audience's benefit, so we get to hear what he genuinely thinks about this groundhog. The first one used up all of his energy, because he was trying to hold it together and trying to be this nice, cordial guy that is, he's pleased to be here and doing all of this stuff. And then as soon as he was done with that one, he's like, I'm done. He did not have the energy to even attempt to try on that second one, which I liked. I also liked, I'm sure you noticed, the guy who holds the blizzard sign upside down.
Yes, I did notice that.
It was just a lovely little random background. Technically it was in the foreground, but he was a background extra just on the text. And I was trying to think, do you think that was a genuine mistake in the shot? And they were like, no, let's keep it in. That's fun.
It wouldn't surprise me if that's how it happened. And also, fun fact, in 1992 and 1993, because I'm not sure if this movie was filmed in 92 or if it was filmed in early 93 and then came out later. But both those years, the actual Punxsutawney Phil did see his shadow, just like he does in the movie. Even though on screen it actually looks quite overcast. Yeah,
I know this film came out, I think, either on or around Groundhog Day 93. So this would have been filmed at some point in 92. So they probably, by that point, because obviously the entire thing about how long winter's going to be, if it's going to be a longer one, I think you get a genuine idea if you just look at the weather patterns, if you can kind of see how things are going. I think you get a good idea really early on what it's going to be like, and they were probably just hedging their bets that it was going to be another 6 more weeks when this film came out. So happy, little happy coincidence there that they got it right. That was nice, but
although I was looking at the past predictions, and it seems like the groundhog sees his shadow about, I would say about 70 to 75% of the time, and his accuracy rate is at 36%, which is pretty low.
Yeah, and that's something that is purely an optic thing, because if you're going to go through that entire rigmarole of does the groundhog see his shadow, would you be more disappointed if the groundhog didn't see its shadow, or if you were there when the groundhog did see its shadow? Because I feel like that's something that, they're like, generally people are going to want him to see his shadow, even if they don't necessarily want more winter, or if they, if they do or whatever. I think it doesn't matter in that regard. I think it is just that people want to say, oh, I was there, the groundhog saw his shadow, and so that's probably why he sees it a large majority of the time, regardless of how accurate it is.
Even though it seems kind of backwards, because him seeing his shadow is the bad news that there's going to be 6 more weeks of winter, and then not seeing his shadow means that there's going to be an early spring.
Right.
And I would say that in going back to the time loop, I would say that this entire Groundhog Day broadcast, I would say that that's the 6th milestone.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot going on, but it all pretty much ties together, and it's pretty much, I would say, one big event. And then the movie goes actually into an interesting direction for something that happens in this first loop, where it spends a couple minutes going off into a storyline that doesn't actually ever repeat again. It's actually more of an explanation thing, where it goes into the blizzard.
Yes, yeah, where he is forced to stay there, and yeah, it actually, when I was watching this clip, and yeah, I had some of my favorite lines in it, including the one I mentioned earlier about not wanting to stand and talk with Needle-Nosed Ned, but I think my favorite line in this entire loop is, and again, it's such a quick one, and they even cut away ridiculously fast from it, but it is when Phil is talking to the policeman and freezing his ass off, and the guy says, look, you can stand here and freeze to death, or you can go back to Punxsutawney. And it just holds on him for a minute, and he just goes, I'm thinking. Again, the delivery of that line, and after everything, that was probably my favorite line in this loop.
Yeah, that scene does have some of the best lines altogether, and it has Bill Murray just, like, you can feel how cold it is just by how he's talking. And I wouldn't be surprised that, like, I believe it actually was fairly cold on that day, and the snow that you see flying around is actually snow machine snow. So you have the added cold of, these ice flakes coming from, an ice chipper snow machine. And Bill Murray is just wearing a dress shirt and no coat.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I genuinely couldn't tell. It looked like, as you probably know, a lot of films, whenever they had to say, oh, look, it's snowing, and it's not cold enough for it to actually snow, or for them to do that, they will use potato flakes, because it looks quite a lot like snow when it's on screen, and you can do a little bit of nice visual editing to make it look even more realistic. But some of the times when it was snowing, especially when they're driving on the road, and it's like, oh no, the snow's picking up, it's like, yeah, that was some not so great CG on that. But yeah, no, that's interesting. I'll have to double check it again. I couldn't tell if it was actual snow, shall we say, or if it was snow substitute.
Yeah, the other thing that you kind of remind me of, that I feel like shows do a lot anymore, is they'll actually CGI the breath that you see, because on the Netflix show The Ranch, I watched that whole show. It's okay. It's a good background show.
Okay.
It has some good moments. It has some funny bits. It unfortunately has Danny Masterson in it, who now it's a little bit more painful to watch, especially considering his character is very similar to the things that he was accused of. There are many scenes in that where it takes place in the winter, and me watching it, I am like 85% certain that the breath that you see whenever they're outside is CGI breath.
Interesting. All right. Yeah, that,
because it just has that, like slightly uncanny valley feel to it, where it doesn't look like it's real breath that you would see if it was actually cold.
Yeah, and yeah, because a lot of times breath like that, it doesn't behave the way that if you were going to, pretend that it's there, it doesn't behave the way you would think it does, and yet the way you think it behaves is how you animate it. So, yeah, it's always really tricky to get something like that looking accurate, which is why they genuinely don't bother in the older films. So, yeah, it probably was cold enough. That,
Even though you don't actually see Phil's breath as he's talking, or the police officers, and you don't, and it's not quite cold enough. Well, he also wasn't out there very long for his nose and ears to start turning red. Like, whenever you see those kind of things, that's whenever you know it's really cold for the actors. But it was filmed in winter, so it was, even if it wasn't that cold, it was winter time.
Yes, yeah, it was not warm. So, yeah. My last note was actually like from the very end of the scene. So was there anything that you wanted to touch on from the bar? Because I know they're only in the bar for like about 15 seconds, but was there anything from that?
I would even call like the bar is basically the seventh and last milestone. Even though he doesn't really return to the bar in the same way that he does in this first loop, he does return to the bar itself.
Right. Yeah, and that's something that I was going to say, probably best to mention just as a stepping stone for later, based on my admittedly a little sketchy memory of the end of the film. But obviously in this particular loop, the only reason that it's there is they go and drink there before going to bed because there's nothing else to do.
Yeah, and we also get, even like just a little bit more of Phil's abrasive personality where he criticizes the drink for not having enough alcohol in it. And, he mentions that he's going to go back and do some light reading, maybe a Hustler. So and we get more of Phil, like bad Phil's personality.
Yeah, and this first go through really gave you a good baseline for how Phil is, how he has been. So yeah, it's interesting to see. Although my last note is it's a genuine question, and I would like I want to know if you have an answer for me because I didn't understand it. Like, is there something about you just don't have hot water in old houses? Like, I didn't get that that whole bit that you even mentioned at the beginning as being the end of this, where he wants a shower but it's cold, and he asks about it, and she just he said, "Is there no hot water?" And she just said, "Well, no, there wouldn't be today."
Yeah, I have no idea, and my idea of doing research is listening to another podcast that's the Movies by Minute, Groundhog Minute, and they spend some time talking about that, and they have no idea either. That like the best guess is that it's Groundhog Day, so it's a popular day for the inn, so all the other guests used up all the hot water already.
Okay.
But other than that, it doesn't make any sense. Like, no, there wouldn't be any hot water today, other than the other thing, which I'm not going to go into too much here. But on Groundhog Minute, they have a running joke or running theory that Miss Lancaster is the one that is behind Phil being trapped in the loop, and that she's the Loki-esque figure that is the one messing with Phil and causing him to repeat the day.
Interesting. And yeah, I mean, obviously I can assume when she's like, will you be checking out today? Like, yeah, obviously if she's the one in charge, that's an extra, just like little to Phil. I'm really intrigued to see where this goes. Like, I'm looking forward to hearing your other episodes on this because I want to see where you branch off with this. So,
and I think it's interesting too because one thing that I actually haven't really done, like I have seen like bits and pieces throughout the entire movie because I spent the time to edit the movie myself into each individual day. But I haven't actually sat down and watched the movie from beginning to end. I'm actually being in with the loop with Phil this time around, and I'm just watching it one day at a time.
Yeah, that both sounds interesting, and also something that I know I myself would have trouble doing that, because I know me, and I know that I would start that with the best of intentions, and then like round about the like 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th run through, I would start running out of steam. So I do not begrudge you for for taking all this time and setting this up, and I will definitely by the time this episode comes out, I will have subscribed and listened to the first episode. So yes, I am definitely going to be along for the ride on this one.
Yeah, just a couple other things before we finish up today. I think it's interesting that this first loop is just barely 11 minutes long, and about 2 of those minutes is spent just explaining why he can't leave town in the later loops with the blizzard. But I would say that's pretty efficient. They don't really waste any narrative time in this.
No, absolutely. I mean, they perfectly set up the big beats that, even on watching it the first time, these are going to be the repetitive ones. So, the music, Ned Ryerson, the actual, the broadcast, or the recording of the broadcast, I should say, and that's also they do very well at setting that up, but also not making a huge deal out of it.
Yeah.
So it's really, really interesting to watch this as a standalone. That's been, I think, the most fun thing to me has been to watch this and be like, oh, just by itself, it's a solid thing. Like, I could even see this as being, I'm sure it was thought of this way as well at the time, but like this almost felt like the beginning of a Twilight Zone episode. Like it's so nice and tightly packed, and the pacing's wonderful. So yeah, really well done.
Yeah, and then I also have a couple questions that I've been asking, or that I will be asking everybody. There's a lot of variance in how long people think that Phil was actually trapped inside his own Groundhog Day. What would be the number that you think that he was trapped?
Okay, I mean, that's interesting, because I'm sure you yourself definitely have heard all the theories that are out there. I don't know if they've come up in the previous episode or will come up in future episodes. I went and had a look at some. I've seen someone saying 10 years. I've seen 33 years. I've seen 10,000 days. There's so many different things, and obviously nobody knows. There's no definitive thing because, thankfully we don't see every single loop that he's been on. But yeah, I was trying to think about it, and given the skills that he picks up by the end of the film, he is able to quite flawlessly, play the piano, do a specific ice sculpture with the chainsaw. And I was even trying to think about it, like, even that's probably the only ice sculpture he can do. Like, let's just say he just learned to do the one. He's terrible at doing anything else, but he has muscle memoried his way into doing this one thing. That would take so long, and then we see all of the other things that he attempts and stuff like that. So I'm gonna say, I would guess he'd stuck in it for about 15 to 20 years. I think somewhere in there, because he has to unlearn his old habits, pick up all of those skills that he's doing. To some extent, He's probably still following through with some of the day's activities anyway, just to keep it fresh in his mind. So he's not spending the entire day learning these skills. So yeah, I think 15 to 20 years, somewhere in there.
That's a good number. But I'm interesting to see what the ranges are going to be for everybody that's on here. And then the other thing that I'm curious about is, like you mentioned, there are a lot of days that we don't see. What's one day that you think Phil had to have done? Basically, like a deleted scene that they never filmed, but maybe they should have.
I think something that he 100% did, and I genuinely want to know what the result was, and probably round about the 5th or 6th time, I think he got up, got dressed, walked out of the front door, got into the nearest car with keys, and drove. I think he tried to get as far away as fast as he possibly could to see if there was any way to get out, because the blizzard doesn't come in until the end, as we see. That really there's no reason he couldn't just leave during the day. So
yeah, it's interesting that you said that, because that actually does come up in an earlier version of the script, where they did have the idea to film not just the one blizzard scene, but they had plans to film multiple blizzard scenes where Phil would go off into a different direction every single day, and then any direction that he tried to go to, it was blizzard. Like, Punxsutawney was basically surrounded by blizzard, but it's not snowing within the city until the very end of the day.
Alright, yeah, that's fun, because that is the one thing that I'm sad isn't in the film. However, from a narrative standpoint, I fully understand why, because any explanation that they could have come up with and filmed for why he couldn't get away wouldn't have been as good as something that we could just come up with to justify it ourselves. There would have been so many people that wouldn't get it.
Basically, what they did in the 2 minutes that we saw is good enough.
Yeah.
They didn't have to spend another 5 minutes on it. Is there anything else that you have?
I can't think of anything right now. The only thing I will say is, because I know I'm not on those episodes, I am looking forward to listening to the episode you guys do when Phil starts to explain to Rita that he knows everything that's going to happen on that day. That's one of my favorite loops, is when he finally just goes meh, I know, I know everything about everybody in this diner. I know all that stuff. I'm intrigued to see where your discussion goes with that one, because that's one of my favorite scenes in the film.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one as well. But I'd like to thank you for joining me today. And why don't you go ahead and let everybody else know where they can find you online?
Yeah, sure. I'm seriously thanks for having me on. It's been a blast. I haven't seen this film in such a long time, so it was interesting to not only get back to it in some fashion, but in this really interesting way. So yeah. So thank you for that. But yes, if anyone has enjoyed listening to me ramble on, then you can definitely hear me ramble on my own podcast, so the BlokeBusters Podcast. If you literally search BlokeBusters in Google, number one, you have to tell Google that you did actually mean BlokeBusters and not Blockbusters. But once you do that, you can find us. We've got BlokeBusters.com. We're on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram at BlokeBusters. I'm mostly active on Twitter over the three of those. Not super active at this point, just because everything. But I try and make sure that there's some stuff going on there. We're also now a part of the All Ports Open network, allportsopen.com, and there's a whole bunch of other podcasts on there. A lot of tabletop role-playing podcasts and other creative ones, including regular guests on BlokeBusters, Janelle Megan. She has joined up with Megan Martin, and she has also been on BlokeBusters, and they do a podcast called Cause and Creation, where they interview creative people and stuff like that. So, yeah, I recommend that. I recommend, obviously, BlokeBusters. I also have been doing Filmily Fortunes, which is a film podcast, film quiz podcast. So go look at it. It is Filmily Fortunes. It's the name of that one. Do go check that out. It is some of the most interesting podcasting that I've done. I'm the host of that one. So yeah, I recommend checking that out. And once again, seriously, good. Thank you for having me on for this.
No problem. It was a lot of fun. And I have been Bubbawheat, and you can find this podcast and my written reviews of superhero and comic book movies at flightstitesandmovienights.com. You can also find us on Anchor FM and anywhere else you can find podcasts. It's time to rewind, and this first season is Groundhog Day after day after day. And I will see you on the next loop.
Bye, 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 bye.
I'm a god. Well, what if there is no tomorrow? I'm a god. There wasn't one today.
What are you doing for dinner?
Something else.